That didn't really happen, but it did. And he's doing it because what he cares about is his ego, his money, and his status. He's not thinking about you. He sees power. He sees you as a means to his ends. He wants the middle class to pay the price for another huge tax cut that would mostly help him and his country club buddies. But wait, before we get to what actually happened on that stage, you need to understand what was supposed to happen. Because what was planned for that night and what actually unfolded, those are two completely different stories. And the gap between them, that's where everything gets interesting. The stage was already tense before Donald Trump even touched the microphone. Bright lights covered the National Constitution Center, cameras fixed on every movement, and the audience could feel it, the way you feel a storm before the first drop of rain, that this would not be a normal political forum. This was different. The air was different. The energy was different. On one side sat Trump, turning in his chair like a man waiting for entrance music, restless, impatient, like someone who had already decided the night's outcome and was simply waiting for the world to catch up to his version of it. On the other side sat Barack Obama, calm, measured, patient in that particular way that very confident people are patient, not because they're passive, but because they know they don't need to move first. Patient enough to make silence feel sharper than any insult. Patient enough to make stillness feel like a statement. The topic was supposed to be the state of the nation. That was the plan. That was what the organizers had prepared for. That was what the audience had shown up expecting. But Trump wanted something else. Trump always wants something else. He wanted a fight, a real one, the kind that gets clipped and shared and replayed and talked about for weeks. He wanted a viral moment built on volume and dominance and the particular energy he creates when a room feels like it belongs to him. He wanted to prove that noise could control the room. That certainty was the same thing as authority, that whoever spoke loudest walked away winner. When he challenged Obama directly, he smiled like a man who had taken command, like a boxer who had landed the first punch and was already counting down the finish. He had no idea. He genuinely, completely had no idea. He was walking confidently, publicly, on camera toward the third question, the one that would leave him with nowhere to hide and no answer that could reach him in time. But let's start at the beginning because the beginning matters. The first question sounded simple, almost too simple for a stage this loaded. What is the greatest test of a president's strength? Trump answered first. He grabbed the microphone, and when I say grabbed, I mean it. With both hands, with purpose, with the energy of someone who has been waiting to speak since he walked in the door. He talked about borders. He talked about enemies. He talked about military power and dominance and fake news and the radical left and winning so much that people would get tired of winning. His supporters in the room cheered because the answer sounded like a rally. It had rhythm. It had force. It had the particular music of performance, the kind that makes your chest feel something even when your brain hasn't quite processed what was said. And for a moment, just a moment, it felt like Trump had controlled the room again, like the familiar gravity of his presence had done what it always does, pulled everything toward him. Obama waited. He waited until the applause faded, until the noise settled, until the room remembered it was listening. Then he said, "Strength is not measured by how loudly a president shouts or by how many enemies he creates." He paused just long enough. Strength is measured by whether people feel safer, freer, and more united after his decisions. He did not say Trump's name. He did not need to. And he employs this strategy like politicians have for millennia because having people divided and angry boosts his chances of being elected. That's his focus. Is this going to help me? Not. Is this going to help you? And along with those intentions, there's also the contrast. Just sitting there in the room, visible, undeniable, not something anyone had to argue about or explain or spin. One answer chased applause, the other carried responsibility. One answer asked, "How does this make me look?" The other asked, "What does this actually do for the country?" That was the first crack. Trump leaned back and muttered that Obama sounded boring. But even that reaction, that dismissive, almost reflex reaction, helped Obama's point without Obama having to say another word, because the audience had seen the difference with their own eyes. Trump wanted strength to mean dominance. Obama made strength mean service. And when Trump called that boring, he was essentially confirming everything Obama had just implied. He was announcing out loud in front of cameras that service felt dull to him, that responsibility felt slow, that anything which wasn't about winning, fighting, dominating, or performing registered as boring. The audience noticed, not loudly, quietly, the words kind of noticing. Then came the second question, and this is where the night started to shift. What is the most misunderstood part of your presidency? Trump moved quickly, like a man who believes speed is the same thing as confidence. He said he was attacked from day one. He said the media never treated him fairly. Every scandal, fake. Every investigation, political. Every critic, corrupt, biased, part of a machine built specifically to destroy him. The answer became less about the presidency and more about grievance. Detailed, comprehensive, exhaustive grievance. A catalog of every person, institution, and incident that had ever made him feel wronged. And for a moment, a strange, familiar moment, the room fell back into the old pattern. Because this is what Trump does best. He doesn't just complain, he performs complaint. He makes the audience feel the injustice as if it happened to them. He makes his wound feel like their wound. And it works. It has always worked. For a specific kind of audience at a specific temperature of frustration, it works remarkably well. But here's what was happening underneath that performance, underneath the grievance and the media attacks and the political persecution and all of it. Trump was no longer answering the question. He had abandoned the question entirely. The question was about the presidency, about what the country misunderstood, and instead the answer was about him, his feelings, his treatment, his injuries. He was asking the audience to feel sorry for the most powerful man in the country, to look at someone who had held the presidency of the United States and hear primarily, loudly at length, how hard it had been on him personally. Obama paused before responding. He doesn't care if he caused more women their reproductive freedoms because apparently it doesn't affect his life. Most of us, most of all, Donald Trump wants us to think that this country is hopelessly divided between us and them. Now for him, us means the quote, real Americans who support him. His face carried the look of a man who had heard enough, but who still refused to lose control. He said, the most misunderstood part of the presidency is that there are no easy days in that office. He wasn't performing, he wasn't rallying, he was stating a fact in the way that people who have actually lived something state facts, flatly, calmly, without decoration. Every decision is a choice between difficult options. Every choice affects families who may never know your name. He let that breathe. The presidency is not a performance. He looked directly at the room. It is service. Then he delivered the line that tightened the room like a cable under tension. The presidency is not about your feelings. A beat. It is about the American people. The silence after that sentence was heavier than applause. That's the only way to describe it. Heavier, not quiet in the way a room goes quiet between moments. Quiet in the way a room goes quiet when something true has been said and everyone knows it and no one quite knows what to do with it yet. Trump's smile disappeared. Not all at once, slowly, the way a signal fades. His grievance, which had just filled the room, suddenly sounded smaller, almost exposed, like something that had been impressive in the dark and looked different in the light. Obama had taken the center of Trump's answer, the self-focus, the victim narrative, the everything is about me, and placed it beside something harder, something that weighed more, the actual burden of leadership. The audience did not erupt. It went quiet. And that quiet was worse, because noise can be managed, applause can be redirected, a crowd can be turned, but silence means people are thinking, and people thinking, really thinking, is the one thing performance cannot survive. But that was only the beginning, because the night wasn't over. The third question was still coming, and no one in that room, including Trump, was ready for it. True story. True story. I mean, it's embossed with his name right on it, Donald Trump edition, right next to Matthew and Luke, Donald. And I'll give you one guess where those Bibles are made. He's Mr. Tough Guy on China, except when it comes to making a few bucks. You cannot make this stuff up. You really can't. If some of this stuff happened on Saturday Night Live, you'd be like, all right, that's going too far. What is the single most essential quality of a commander-in-chief? That was the question. Simple, direct, impossible to dodge, or so everyone thought. Trump leaned forward, voice lower this time, sharper, like he was sharing a secret that the room needed to hear. Toughness, he said. A president has to be a fighter, willing to do whatever it takes to win. Never weak, never pushed around, never apologizing. He sat back, the punctuation of a man who believes he has just closed a chapter. Final word delivered. Case shut. Room 1. Obama did not rush. He never rushes. He let the silence stretch out long enough that the room started to lean forward. And then, the most essential quality in a commander-in-chief is truthfulness. He paused, let it land. Because without truth, there is no trust. Another pause, shorter. And without trust, there is no leadership. The room froze. Not dramatically, not theatrically, just froze. The way a room freezes when it recognizes something it can't argue with. Obama didn't stop there. He calmly, methodically, without a single raised syllable, explained what he meant. Truth matters most, he said. Not when it's easy, not when the facts are convenient, Not when the polls are good and the advisors agree and the path forward is clear. Truth matters most when facts are inconvenient, when the advisors disagree, when the polls look bad, when admitting reality costs applause. That's when it matters. That's when it separates leaders from performers. A leader who bends the truth to protect himself cannot ask the country to trust him in a crisis. Think about that. Really think about it. Not as a political statement, as a practical observation about the relationship between a leader and the people he leads. If your leader has established a pattern, a clear, documented public pattern of adjusting facts to serve his comfort, to avoid accountability, to protect his image and his ego and his standing in the room, what happens the day a real crisis arrives? Not a manufactured one, not a media battle or a policy dispute or a ratings war, a real one. The kind where the information matters. The kind where what the leader tells you determines what you do next. The kind where being wrong doesn't cost a news cycle. It costs lives. What happens then? Do you trust him? Can you? Should you? Obama posed that question without asking it directly. He laid the logic out step by step so quietly and so clearly that there was no way to arrive at a different answer. A president can survive criticism. Many have. Most have. History is full of presidents who were criticized, attacked, mocked, investigated, opposed at every turn, and still governed. But a nation cannot survive leadership that treats truth like an enemy. That turns facts into a threat. That makes honesty into something to be punished. Trump shifted. He tried to interrupt. The reflex of a man who has learned that speaking over someone is the fastest way to make their words disappear. But the moment had already landed. It was already in the room. It was already in the audience. It was already settling into the quiet, permanent place where things go when they're true and people know it. By the time the forum ended, something had happened that no amount of spin could fully undo. The night was supposed to be about who could dominate the stage, who could own the room, who could walk out with the most applause, the most clips, the most viral moments, the most energy transferred into support. And Trump had come ready for that fight. He had brought every tool, the performance, the grievance, the volume, the combativeness, the familiar music of his political identity, all of it. But Obama had changed the question, not loudly, not aggressively, not even obviously in the moment. He had simply, calmly, patiently, without ego, redefined what the night was supposed to be measuring. It was no longer about dominance. It was about definition. What is strength? What is leadership? What is the presidency for? And by the time those questions had been fully answered by both men in their own words, on the same stage in front of the same cameras, the contrast was not something anyone had to argue about. It was simply visible. Trump had walked into that room believing the fight was his to win, believing that volume was authority, that certainty was intelligence, that performance was leadership, that whoever made the most noise walked away with the most power. And for a long time, for longer than most people would like to admit, that belief had served him well. It had worked in boardrooms. It had worked in reality TV. It had worked at rallies where the crowd already loved him before he said a word. It had worked in debates where the rules favored aggression. It had even worked once well enough to win a presidency. But on that stage, in that room, with that particular opponent sitting 5 feet away, the rules changed. Not because anyone announced it, not because the moderators adjusted anything, but because Obama had simply refused to play the game. He refused to fight on Trump's terms. He refused to compete for volume, dominance, the biggest reaction, the loudest moment. He played a different game entirely, one where the winning condition wasn't noise, it was clarity. And here's what nobody talks about when they replay that night. The most dangerous moment for Trump wasn't any single answer. It wasn't the strength question or the presidency question or the truthfulness line. The most dangerous moment was the cumulative effect of sitting next to someone who didn't need the room's approval to feel certain, who didn't need applause to feel confident, who didn't need to call the other person stupid to feel smart, who didn't need to perform leadership because he had already practiced it, because that's what the room saw. Not just two different answers to two different questions, two different relationships with power. One that needs constant feeding, constant validation, constant applause, constant confirmation that everyone in the room sees the greatness being performed for them, and one that doesn't. One that can sit quietly, absorb the noise, wait for the right moment, and then say something true. Without asking for permission, without checking the reaction, without adjusting the message based on how the crowd is feeling. Trump left that stage having given exactly the performance he planned. Every line delivered, every crowd moment hit, every familiar beat landed with precision. He had executed his strategy without a single deviation, and it still wasn't enough. Because strategy can fill a room, but it can't fill the silence after someone has said something true. And the truth Obama delivered that night, the quiet, devastating, unanswerable truth, was this: leadership is not about you. It was never about you. It will never be about you. The moment you make it about you, your enemies, your grievances, your feelings, your glory, your image, your applause, you have already stopped leading. You have started performing. And performance, no matter how polished, no matter how loud, no matter how enthusiastically received, is not the same thing as service. That's the line the night kept coming back to, not because Obama repeated it, he said it once, but it kept echoing. In the silence after the strength question, in the quiet after the grievance answer, in the pause before the truthfulness response. It echoed because it kept fitting. Every answer Trump gave proved it. Every performance confirmed it. Every moment of dominance demonstrated it. He was not there to serve, he was there to win. And the problem with coming to a leadership forum to win is that leadership isn't a competition. The country isn't a prize. The presidency isn't a trophy. And the people watching, the real ones, the ones counting their grocery bills and waiting for care and buying classroom supplies with their own money and trying to make the numbers work at the end of a long, expensive month, they're not an audience. They're the point. Trump never understood that. Or maybe he did and simply didn't care. Either answer is its own kind of indictment. Either he lacked the capacity to see past his own reflection, or he saw past it, understood exactly what leadership required, and chose himself anyway. The stage went dark eventually. The cameras stopped. The audience went home. The clips spread across the internet and the commentary began, and the spin machines on both sides started their familiar work. But something remained in the people who had watched, in the ones who had sat quietly when applause might have been easier, in the ones who had let the silence speak. The question that had been planted, not by any moderator, not by any journalist, not by any analyst with a chyron and a talking point, but by two men on a stage answering the same questions, revealing two completely different understandings of what the word leader actually means. Is this going to help me, or is this going to help you? That's the question. That's always been the question. And every election, every forum, every debate, every speech, every policy, every decision made in the name of the American people is just a different version of the same answer. Watch who asks which question, because everything else follows from there. Everything.